The lace on my wedding dress caught on the stone as I fell to my knees, but it was my father's voice that tore my heart to pieces. The bruises heal. Marcus's voice crackled through the phone speaker, his cruel laughter echoing off the Gothic arches of St. Catherine's Cathedral. She'll learn to obey. I pressed my trembling body against the cold stone pillar, my heart hammering louder than the church bells that had been ringing just moments before. The white satin of my dress, the dress I'd dreamed about since I was 5 years old, was already stained with dirt and tears. Just keep the payments coming, my father's voice replied, and I felt my world tilt on its axis. She doesn't know about Diego's situation. The phone was on speaker. Marcus must have set it down while he stepped away from whatever shadowy corner he'd retreated to for this urgent business call. The call that was about to destroy everything I believed about love, family, and the man I was supposed to marry in 20 minutes. Your daughter's inheritance will cover my debts, Marcus continued, his tone as casual as if he were discussing the weather. After the wedding, she's mine completely. The blood-red stained glass windows cast ominous shadows across my face as I doubled over, vomiting onto the cathedral floor. My carefully styled hair fell in waves around my shoulders as my body shook with the force of betrayal so profound it felt like physical violence. What if she tries to leave? Roberto Martinez, my father, the man who used to carry me on his shoulders, who taught me to ride a bike, who walked me to school every day, asked the question like he was discussing livestock. I have ways, Marcus replied, and his laughter sent ice through my veins. I ripped the engagement ring from my finger with such force it left my knuckle bloody. The 2-carat diamond hit the stone floor with a tiny ping that seemed to echo through the cathedral like a gunshot. Under my feet, the white roses from my bouquet lay crushed, their petals scattered like the remains of my shattered dreams. They had sold me. My own family had sold me to a monster, and I had been walking toward my own destruction in a white dress and a smile. Not anymore. Before we continue, please write in the comment which country you are watching this video. We love knowing where our global family is tuning in from. And if this is your first time on this channel, please subscribe. Your support helps us bring even more epic revenge tales of life. Enjoy listening. My name is Sofia Martinez, and 3 hours ago I thought I was the luckiest woman alive. I teach kindergarten at Sunshine Elementary, and I've always believed that people are fundamentally good. That love conquers all. That families protect each other. At 26, I still believed in fairy tales despite everything I'd endured. Growing up in the Martinez household had been like walking on eggshells made of dynamite. My father, Roberto, had a temper that could explode without warning. My mother, Carmen, had perfected the art of nervous laughter and quick subject changes. My younger brother Diego had always been trouble, the kind of kid who set fires and tortured small animals before moving on to bigger, more dangerous games. But I survived by being perfect. Perfect grades, perfect behavior, perfect daughter who never caused problems. I learned to read the room like a survival manual, to anticipate anger before it erupted, to make myself small and unnoticed when the storms hit. When I met Marcus Kane 8 months ago at a charity fundraiser for the school, he seemed like everything I'd prayed for. Tall, successful, sophisticated. He owned a chain of upscale restaurants and always wore expensive suits that made him look like he'd stepped out of a magazine. More importantly, he seemed gentle, proactive, safe. You're different from other women, he'd whispered on our second date, his hand covering mine across the candlelit table. So pure, so trusting. I want to protect that innocence. Looking back now, those words should have been warning sirens. But I heard them as love songs. Marcus pursued me with an intensity that made my head spin. Expensive flowers delivered to my classroom. Weekend trips to wine country. Diamond earrings just because. He told me I was beautiful, special, the woman he'd been waiting for his whole life. I've never felt this way about anyone, he'd said when he proposed just 4 months after we met. I can't imagine my life without you, Sofia. Marry me. The proposal happened at my family's house during Sunday dinner. Marcus had asked my father's permission first, like a proper gentleman. Roberto had been so pleased, so proud. He's a good man, Mija. A provider. He'll take care of you. Carmen cried happy tears and immediately started planning the wedding. Even Diego seemed excited, joking about how he'd finally have a rich brother-in-law. But there had been signs. Small things that I explained away because I wanted so desperately to believe in our love story. The way Marcus gripped my wrist just a little too tightly when he was jealous. The fingerprint bruises I covered with concealer and explained away as my own clumsiness. The way his voice would drop to that dangerous whisper when I disappointed him. How he insisted on managing my finances, to protect my teacher's salary. The way he monitored my phone and email for security purposes. "You're too trusting," he'd say whenever I questioned his protectiveness. "There are dangerous people out there who would take advantage of someone as sweet as you." He isolated me so gradually I didn't notice it happening. Friends stopped calling because Marcus always had emergencies during social events. My colleague Sarah invited me for drinks one evening, but Marcus showed up with a dozen roses and a story about his business partner being in the hospital. "Sophia's needed at home," he told Sarah with that charming smile. Rain check. There was never a rain check. When I mentioned wanting to visit my Aunt Elena, who lived 3 hours away, Marcus would suddenly have panic attacks about being alone. When I suggested keeping my own apartment after the wedding, he'd launched into speeches about how marriage meant being a team, how separate spaces showed a lack of commitment. "Don't you want to build a life together?" he'd ask, his eyes filling with what looked like hurt. "I thought you loved me." I did love him. Or I loved who I thought he was. The man who brought me coffee every morning, who listened to my stories about my kindergartners, who seemed to think I hung the moon and stars. The man who had explosive rage episodes followed by expensive apology gifts. The man who had threatened to handle my friend Marcus when she expressed concerns about our relationship. The man who had a history of accidents happening to ex-partners who tried to expose him, though I didn't learn that until much later. This morning, getting ready for our wedding, I'd felt like a princess in a fairy tale. My dress was everything I'd dreamed of, ivory satin with delicate lace sleeves, a cathedral train that would photograph beautifully as I walked down the aisle. Carmen had spent hours on my hair, creating an elaborate updo with tiny pearls woven throughout. "You look like an angel, Mija," she'd whispered, tears in her eyes as she fastened my grandmother's pearl necklace around my throat. The same necklace that had been part of the inheritance Marcus was apparently planning to steal. The same mother who had just helped sell me to a monster. I should have seen it. The signs were all there, written in bruises I explained away and isolation I accepted as love. My family's sudden financial stress that coincided with Diego's mysterious legal troubles. The way they all seemed so eager for this wedding, so relieved when Marcus proposed. The way my own mother had access to my bank accounts and had been forging my signature on documents I'd never seen. But I'd been living in a fairy tale, and fairy tales don't prepare you for the moment you discover the prince is actually the dragon, and your own family has thrown you into his cave. The morning of the wedding, storm clouds had gathered over St. Catherine's Cathedral like an omen I was too blinded by happiness to read. The Gothic architecture, which I'd chosen for its romantic beauty, suddenly seemed ominous. Gargoyles leered down from stone perches, and the blood-red stained glass windows cast everything in an unsettling crimson glow. Even the flowers seemed wrong. The white roses I'd specially ordered were wilting in the unusual October heat, their petals browning at the edges like they were diseased. "It's just nerves, Mija," Carmen had said when I mentioned the strange atmosphere. But her smile didn't reach her eyes, and her hands shook as she helped me into my dress. "Every bride gets nervous," she continued, but there was something desperate in her voice. Something that should have made me ask questions. Instead, I focused on the wedding preparations, on the fantasy I'd built in my mind. Marcus and I would have 3 children, 2 girls and a boy. We'd live in his beautiful house in the hills, the one with the swimming pool and the view of the city. I'd continue teaching until the babies came, and then I'd be the perfect wife and mother. It was going to be perfect. We were going to be perfect. But Marcus had been acting strangely all morning. Pacing, checking his phone obsessively, taking hushed phone calls that made his jaw tighten with anger. "Business troubles," he'd explained when I asked. "Nothing for you to worry about, sweetheart." He'd been calling me sweetheart more often lately, especially when I asked questions he didn't want to answer. It was a dismissal disguised as an endearment. Roberto had been acting strange too, jumping every time his phone rang. Avoiding eye contact. When I hugged him before walking to the bridal suite, he'd held me just a little too long, like he was saying goodbye. "I'm proud of you, Mija," he'd whispered. "I hope you can forgive us someday." Then he excused himself, saying he wanted to take care of some important guests. "Forgive you for what?" I should have asked. But I was too caught up in the moment, too excited about finally becoming Mrs. Marcus Kane. Diego hadn't even shown up. He's dealing with some legal issues, Carmen had explained vaguely. Nothing serious. He'll be at the reception. Legal issues. The phrase that would take on such sinister meaning just hours later. Even Father William seemed nervous as we did the final rehearsal. His hands shook as he blessed the wedding rings, and he kept glancing toward the doors like he was expecting trouble. "Are you sure about this, child?" he'd asked me quietly when Marcus stepped away to take yet another phone call. "Of course, Father. Why wouldn't I be?" He'd studied my face for a long moment, his old eyes full of concern. Sometimes God puts doubt in our hearts for a reason. Sometimes what looks like love is actually something much darker. At the time I thought he was just being overprotective. Father William had baptized me, given me my first communion, watched me grow up. He was like a grandfather to me. Now I realize he was trying to save me. But I was determined to have my fairy tale wedding. I'd sent the invitations, ordered the cake, reserved the reception hall. My dress fit perfectly, my flowers were arranged despite the wilting, and my prince was waiting for me at the altar. Or so I thought. 30 minutes before the ceremony was scheduled to begin, Marcus's phone rang. His face went pale as he answered it, and I watched his expression shift from concern to anger to something that looked almost like fear. "I have to take this," he'd said, kissing my forehead with lips that felt cold against my skin. "Start without me if you need to. This won't take long." He'd walked away with the phone pressed to his ear, his voice already rising in agitation. I should have followed him immediately. Should have demanded to know what was happening. But I was trained to be the good girl, the one who didn't cause problems, who waited patiently for men to handle the important business. So I waited. And waited. And waited. The wedding guests were getting restless. Carmen kept checking her watch and making excuses. Then I realized my father is not still back from wherever he went to take care of important guests. Finally, 15 minutes late, I decided to find Marcus myself. I walked through the cathedral's corridors, my train rustling against the stone floors, following the sound of his voice. That's when I heard it. The conversation that destroyed my world. The conversation that revealed I wasn't a beloved daughter or a cherished fiancé. I was merchandise. A commodity being sold to the highest bidder. And the people I trusted most had negotiated the terms of my captivity. Crouched behind that stone pillar, my wedding dress torn and stained with tears, I forced myself to keep listening even though every word felt like a knife through my heart. "She trusts us completely," Roberto was saying. I heard my own father's voice on the other side of the speaker. "Always has. She never questions anything, never looks too close at the finances." "Good," Marcus replied. "That innocence is exactly what I need. A wife who doesn't ask inconvenient questions." "What about Diego?" "The lawyer says he needs $200,000 for the plea bargain," Marcus said. "Vehicular manslaughter while under the influence, plus the victim compensation. Without it, he's looking at 10 to 15 years. Vehicular manslaughter. My brother had eliminated someone while driving drunk, and my family was using my marriage to pay for his legal defense. But that's not the worst part," Roberto continued, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried clearly in the cathedral's acoustics. "Sophia doesn't know about the embezzlement investigation." My blood turned to ice. "Embezzlement?" "The construction company audit starts Monday," Roberto explained. "I've been moving money around for months, trying to cover Diego's legal bills and his other expenses. If they find out..." "They won't," Marcus said confidently. "Because by tomorrow Sophia will be my wife, and her inheritance will be mine to manage. The $300,000 from her grandmother's estate will clear your debts and pay Diego's lawyers. Everyone wins. Everyone except me." "What if she figures it out?" my father asked, his voice shaking. "What if she finds out about the forged signatures? The documents Carmen signed giving us access to her accounts?" "She won't," Marcus said with absolute certainty. "And if she does, she'll be too scared to do anything about it." "Scared?" Roberto asked. Marcus laughed and the sound made my skin crawl. "You've seen what happens when she disappoints me. The bruises. The way she flinches when I move too fast. She knows what I'm capable of even if she pretends it's all accidents." I looked down at my arms, at the fading yellow-green marks I'd covered with makeup and convinced myself were from my own clumsiness. The time I'd walked into a door, after questioning Marcus's need to read my text messages. The time I'd slipped on the stairs, after mentioning that my friend Sarah thought he was controlling. Not accidents. Warnings. Besides, Marcus continued, where would she go? She has no money of her own, I've made sure of that. No friends left. I've isolated her completely. And now she won't even have family to run to, because you'll all be depending on my generosity to stay out of prison. The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. He hadn't just been abusing me, he'd been systematically destroying my ability to escape with my own family's help. There's one more thing, Roberto said, his voice barely audible. The girl who died in Diego's accident, she was pregnant. The cathedral seemed to spin around me. My brother had killed a pregnant woman while driving drunk, and my family was selling me into slavery to keep him out of prison. How pregnant? Marcus asked. 6 months. The family is pushing for maximum sentencing. That's why we need the plea bargain. A pregnant woman. Baby. Both dead because of my brother's recklessness, and my family thought the appropriate response was to sacrifice me to save his worthless skin. Does Sophia know any of this? Marcus asked. Nothing, my father assured him. She thinks Diego is just having minor legal troubles. Some drunk driving charges that will blow over. Perfect, Marcus said. The less she knows, the easier this will be. I heard footsteps moving away from their conversation spot, and I realized they were heading back toward the main sanctuary. The wedding was about to begin. I was expected to walk down that aisle, smile at the guests, and promise to love, honor, and obey a man who had just described me as property he'd purchased. But something was changing inside me. The gentle kindergarten teacher who always saw the best in people was dying, replaced by someone harder. Someone who understood that when you're surrounded by wolves, you either become prey or you become the predator. I stood up on shaking legs, smoothing down my torn dress. In the reflection of the stained glass windows, I looked like a ghost, pale, ethereal, already dead. But ghosts have power. Ghosts can haunt their killers. I walked back toward the sanctuary, my mind racing. 150 guests were waiting for the show. My family was counting on this wedding to save Diego's worthless life and Roberto's criminal career. Marcus was expecting a compliant wife who would never question his control. They were all about to be very disappointed. I paused at the doors to the main sanctuary, watching through the crack as Marcus took his place at the altar. He looked so handsome in his black tuxedo, so confident and charming. The perfect groom for the perfect fairy tale wedding. But I'd learned something important in that dark corridor. Fairy tales are just stories we tell to make horror seem beautiful. And my story was just beginning. I walked down that aisle like I was walking to my own execution. The wedding march played, but it sounded like a funeral dirge in my ears. 150 guests rose to their feet, smiling and crying happy tears for the beautiful bride and her successful groom. They had no idea they were witnessing the sale of a human being. Carmen beamed at me from the front row, dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief. The same woman who had forged my signature and helped plan my captivity was crying tears of joy at her performance. When Father William asked who gave this woman to be married, Carmen's voice was strong and clear. Her father and I do. The transaction was complete. Marcus took my hand as Carmen placed it in his, and I felt his fingers squeeze just a little too tight. A reminder. A warning. His smile was perfect for the cameras, but his eyes held a coldness that made me shiver. You look beautiful, he whispered, and I managed to smile back. Thank you, I whispered in return, my voice steady despite the chaos in my heart. Father William began the ceremony, but I barely heard the words. All I could think about was that conversation, those terrible revelations. Diego had killed a pregnant woman. Roberto was an embezzler. Carmen was a forger and conspirator. Marcus was an abuser who had bought me like livestock. And I was standing here in a white dress, pretending to be happy about it. When Father William asked if anyone had any reason these two should not be wed, I almost laughed. Where should I start? The domestic abuse? The financial fraud? The fact that the groom had just described his future bride as property he'd purchased? But no one spoke. The silence stretched like a held breath, and then Father William continued with the vows. Marcus Kane, do you take Sophia Martinez to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do, Marcus said, his voice ringing clear and confident through the cathedral. Sophia Martinez, do you take Marcus Kane to be your lawfully wedded husband? I looked into his eyes, saw the satisfaction there, the certainty that he'd won. That I belonged to him now, completely and irrevocably. I began, and the word caught in my throat. Every face in the cathedral turned toward me expectant. Carmen's eyes were wide with panic. Roberta was sweating bullets. Marcus's grip on my hand tightened to the point of pain. I do, I whispered and watched him relax. Poor Marcus. He had no idea what I was really agreeing to. The rings were exchanged. The same ring I'd thrown on the ground just an hour earlier, hastily retrieved and cleaned. When Marcus slipped it onto my finger, it felt like a shackle clicking into place. You may kiss the bride, Father William announced, though I caught the reluctance in his voice. Marcus kissed me with possessive intensity, his hands holding me just a little too tightly, claiming his purchase in front of all these witnesses. The guests erupted in applause and cheers. Rice flew through the air as we walked back down the aisle, now husband and wife. Mrs. Marcus Kane. Property of a monster sold by my own family. But as we posed for photos outside the cathedral, as I smiled and laughed and played the role of the ecstatic bride I was planning. I'd been trained my whole life to be observant, to read people, to anticipate danger. Those survival skills that had helped me navigate my chaotic childhood were about to become weapons. Marcus wanted a submissive wife who would never question his authority. I'd give him exactly what he expected, right up until the moment I destroyed him. Roberto thought he'd solved his financial problems by selling his daughter. He was about to discover the true cost of betrayal. Carmen believed she could forge my signature and steal my inheritance without consequences. She was about to learn that I'd inherited more than money from my grandmother. I'd inherited her spine. And Diego? My brother who'd killed an innocent woman and her unborn child, then let my family sell me to pay for his defense? He was going to face justice, with or without his precious plea bargain. During the reception I played my part perfectly. The blushing bride, so grateful to have found love, so excited about my future as Mrs. Kane. I danced with Marcus, laughed at his jokes, accepted congratulations from guests who had no idea they were celebrating my enslavement. You seem different, Marcus murmured during our first dance. Calmer. I'm just happy, I told him, smiling up at him with practiced adoration. I feel like my real life is finally beginning. In a way it was true. My real life, as someone who fought back, was about to begin. I'm glad, he said, spinning me around the dance floor. Because I have big plans for us, Mrs. Kane. So did I. When Elena, my aunt, approached me during the reception, I could see concern in her eyes. She was the only family member who had always truly cared about me, the only one who might have protected me if she'd known what was happening. Are you all right, Mija? She asked quietly. You seem, I don't know, different. Wedding day nerves, I assured her, hugging her tight. Everything's perfect, Tia. But as I held her, I whispered something in her ear that made her stiffen. Call Detective Rachel Torres at Metro PD tomorrow morning. Tell her Sophia Kane needs help. Tell her it's about Diego Martinez and a vehicular homicide case. Elena pulled back, her eyes wide with questions, but I just smiled and moved on to the next well-wisher. The seeds were planted. Now I just had to water them with evidence and watch my enemy's world burn. The first month of marriage was a masterclass in psychological manipulation, and I learned more about abuse than any textbook could have taught me. Marcus moved me into his house in the hills immediately after our honeymoon. A week in Hawaii where he'd made sure I had no access to phones or internet without his supervision. To help you disconnect from your old life, he'd explained. So we can focus on building our new one together. The house was beautiful in the way that expensive prisons often are. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered stunning views of the city below, but they also made me feel exposed, watched. The security system was state-of-the-art, Marcus explained, designed to keep intruders out. What he didn't say was that it was also designed to keep me in. I've canceled your teaching contract, he informed me on our first morning home. You won't be needing to work anymore. But I love teaching, I protested, keeping my voice carefully mild. And the children need consistency. I can't just abandon them mid-semester. His expression darkened and I felt that familiar chill of fear. But this time I was studying his reaction clinically, cataloging the signs of his impending rage. The muscle that twitched in his jaw. The way his hands clenched into fists. The slight lean forward that preceded violence. You're my wife now, he said, his voice dropping to that dangerous whisper I'd learned to fear. Your job is to take care of our home, not to coddle other people's brats. When I opened my mouth to argue, he grabbed my wrist, the same grip that had left so many bruises before. But now I didn't flinch. I watched his face as he squeezed, memorizing the satisfaction he got from my pain. "Did I hurt you?" he asked afterward when I hissed softly. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. You know I never mean to hurt you." The gaslighting was textbook. Make me question my own perceptions, make me feel like I was overreacting to reasonable behavior. "It's okay," I assured him, the perfect submissive wife. "I know you're just stressed." His smile was warm, loving. "You're so understanding. That's why I fell in love with you." But I had my phone, I saw where he hid it, and when Marcus left for work I called Elena. "Did you speak to Detective Torres?" I asked without preamble. "Yes." Elena's voice was tight with worry. "Sophia, what's going on?" She said there's an ongoing investigation into Diego, something about a fatal accident. "How much do you know about our family's finances?" I asked. There was a pause. "What do you mean?" "I need you to do something for me," I said. "Can you meet me at First National Bank tomorrow? I want to review some documents." Elena agreed, though I could hear the confusion in her voice. She had no idea that she was about to become my co-conspirator in bringing down everything our family had built on lies. That afternoon, while Marcus was at work, I began my investigation. I'd always been organized, detail-oriented, traits that made me a good teacher. Now they would make me a good detective. I started with our financial records. Marcus had insisted on managing all our money for efficiency, but he'd given me access to view the accounts. What I found made my blood run cold. My grandmother's inheritance, $300,000 that should have been mine, had been transferred to Marcus's business account the day after our wedding. Not invested for our future, not saved for our children, but absorbed into his existing financial empire. But that wasn't all. I found transfers to Roberto's account, payments to lawyers I didn't recognize, and most damning of all, a wire transfer for $200,000 to Martinez's legal defense fund. Diego's plea bargain money, paid for by selling his sister. I printed everything, hiding the documents in places Marcus would never think to look. Then I started researching Diego's case. The internet is a wonderful thing when you know what to search for. It took me less than an hour to find the news articles about the accident. "Local woman and unborn child killed in drunk driving accident," read the headline. The photo showed a young woman with dark hair and a bright smile. Sarah Chin, 24 years old, 6 months pregnant with her first child. She'd been driving home from her baby shower when Diego's truck plowed into her at 60 miles per hour. The article mentioned that the suspect had fled the scene and was later arrested at his home. Blood alcohol level twice the legal limit. No remorse, according to the officers who arrested him. I stared at the photo of Sarah Chin for a long time, memorizing her face. She looked like she could have been one of my students' mothers. Young, excited about her future, planning a nursery and picking out names for her baby. Dead because my brother couldn't be bothered to call a cab. And my family thought the appropriate response was to sell me to fund his defense. That evening when Marcus came home, I was the perfect wife. I had dinner waiting, wine poured, candles lit. I wore the black dress he'd complimented before, the one that made me look elegant and sophisticated. "How was your day, sweetheart?" he asked, kissing my cheek with lips that tasted like lies. "Wonderful," I replied, serving his favorite pasta. "I spent the afternoon redecorating our bedroom. I want everything to be perfect for you." His smile was warm, proud. "You're such a good wife, Sophia. I knew I made the right choice." As if marrying me had been about love rather than acquisition. "I have a surprise for you," I said, producing a bottle of expensive whiskey I'd bought that afternoon. To celebrate our first month of marriage. We sat by the fireplace, sipping whiskey and talking about our future. Marcus painted elaborate pictures of the life we'd build together, the trips we'd take, the children we'd have. All funded by the money he'd stolen from me and the freedom he'd purchased from my family. "I want to have your babies," I told him, letting my voice get soft and dreamy. "I want to be the mother of your children." He pulled me into his lap, his hands roaming over my body with possessive familiarity. "Soon," he promised. "Once you're completely settled into your new life." Once I was completely broken, he meant. Once he'd destroyed whatever independence I had left. "I love you so much," I whispered against his ear. "I can't imagine life without you." You'll never have to, he promised, his grip tightening on my waist. We're bound together now. Forever. Forever. If only he knew how short forever was about to become. The next morning I met Elena at the bank. I need to review all the account activity for the past year, I told the banker. Especially any transactions involving joint accounts or power of attorney documents. What we discovered was even worse than I'd imagined. Carmen had been accessing my accounts for months, transferring small amounts that wouldn't trigger alerts. Roberto had forged my signature on documents giving him emergency access to my trust fund. Together they'd stolen nearly $50,000 even before the wedding. This is fraud, Elena breathed, staring at the documents. Sophia, they've been robbing you. I know, I said calmly. And now I have proof. But Elena was sharp. She'd always been the smart one in our family, the one who asked uncomfortable questions. How did you know to look for this? She asked. What made you suspicious? I told her everything. The phone call I'd overheard on my wedding day. Diego's vehicular homicide case. Marcus's abuse and financial control. The way my entire family had conspired to sell me to save themselves. Elena's face went white, then red with rage. Those bastards, she whispered. How dare they? How dare they do this to you? It gets worse, I said, and told her about Sarah and her unborn baby. By the time I finished, Elena was crying. Not sad tears, but the furious tears of someone who's witnessed an unforgivable betrayal. What do you need me to do? She asked. That was the question I'd been waiting for. I need you to be my witness, I said. And I need you to help me gather evidence. Because I'm going to destroy them all. Elena's smile was fierce, reminding me that we shared the same bloodline, the same capacity for protective fury. Where do we start? Detective Rachel Torres was exactly what I'd hoped for. Sharp, experienced, and with zero tolerance for men who hurt women. Elena Vasquez called me about Diego Martinez, she said when I met her at a coffee shop downtown the following week. She mentioned you might have information about the Sarah vehicular homicide case. I'd spent hours preparing for this meeting, organizing documents and rehearsing my story. But facing Detective Torres, I found myself struggling with emotions I hadn't expected. My brother killed a pregnant woman, I said, the words feeling like broken glass in my throat. And my family sold me to pay for his legal defense. Detective Torres studied me carefully. She was in her 40s, with prematurely gray hair and eyes that had seen too much human cruelty. That's a serious accusation, Mrs. Kane. I have proof, I said, sliding a folder across the table. Inside were copies of everything. The bank records showing my stolen inheritance, the forged documents, the transfers to Diego's legal fund, even printouts of text messages between Marcus and Roberto that I'd found on Marcus's laptop. How did you access these? She asked, flipping through the evidence. Marcus likes to work from home sometimes, I explained. His laptop password was my birthday. He never imagined I'd look. It had taken me 3 tries to crack his computer, but abusers are often arrogantly predictable. They assume their victims are too broken to fight back. This is substantial, Detective Torres admitted. But I need to ask, are you in immediate danger? Do you have somewhere safe to go? Not yet, I said honestly. But I'm working on it. She leaned forward, her expression intense. Mrs. Kane, if your husband is abusing you. He is, I interrupted. But I need more than a restraining order. I need to make sure he can't hurt anyone else ever again. Detective Torres nodded slowly. What do you need from me? I need you to reopen the investigation into Diego's finances, I said. Look into how he's paying for his legal defense. Follow the money trail. And I need you to investigate Roberto Martinez for embezzlement at Martinez Construction. And your husband? Marcus is going to hang himself, I said with quiet confidence. I just need to give him enough rope. Detective Torres smiled grimly. I like you, Mrs. Kane. You remind me of myself when I was younger and angrier. I'm not angry, I corrected her. I'm focused. Over the next 2 weeks I became a woman possessed. During the day I played the perfect housewife, cooking Marcus's meals, cleaning his house, warming his bed. I listened to his complaints about work, massaged his shoulders when he was tense, and never once questioned his authority. But when he left for work each morning I transformed into something else entirely. I installed tiny recording devices throughout the house. Technology has made surveillance remarkably easy and affordable. I documented every bruise, every controlling behavior, every threat. I photographed financial documents and recorded phone conversations. Most importantly, I began reaching out to Marcus's ex-girlfriends. It wasn't hard to find them. Marcus was arrogant enough to keep photos and contact information on his computer, probably as trophies. 3 women who'd had the misfortune of dating him before me. The first was Jennifer Walsh, a nurse who'd dated Marcus 2 years earlier. "Why are you asking about Marcus?" she'd said when I called, her voice immediately wary. "I'm his wife," I explained. "And I think I'm in danger." The silence that followed was deafening. "Meet me," Jennifer said finally. "But not anywhere he might see us." We met at a diner 40 miles outside the city. Jennifer was a pretty woman in her early 30s, but I could see the lingering shadows in her eyes, the permanent wariness that comes from surviving an abuser. "He almost killed me," she said without preamble, stirring her coffee with shaking hands. "Not literally, but close enough." She told me about Marcus's escalating violence, the way he'd isolated her from friends and family, the financial control that had left her trapped in his house with no means of escape. "I finally got out when he broke my ribs," she said, unconsciously touching her side. "I was in the hospital for 3 days. When he came to visit, he brought flowers and apologized. Said it was an accident, that I'd fallen down the stairs." "But you didn't," I said. "He threw me down those stairs," she confirmed, "because I'd talked back to him in front of his business partner." "Did you report it?" Jennifer's laugh was bitter. "I tried. But Marcus has friends in the police department, connections everywhere. They treated it like a domestic dispute, said it was he said, she said. Without witnesses or video evidence." "What happened to the other women he dated?" Jennifer's expression darkened. "Lisa moved to another state after he accidentally pushed her into a glass table. Needed 30 stitches on her face. And Maria." She paused, swallowing hard. "Maria tried to press charges. Her car went off a cliff 3 weeks later." "Are you saying he killed her?" "I'm saying Maria was an excellent driver who knew those mountain roads like the back of her hand, and her brake lines just happened to fail on the night she was supposed to testify against him." I felt ice form in my veins. Marcus wasn't just an abuser, he was potentially a murderer. "Why are you telling me this?" Jennifer asked. "What's your plan?" "I'm going to destroy him," I said simply. "But I need evidence. Will you help me?" Jennifer studied my face for a long moment. "You're different from the rest of us," she said finally. "Stronger. Smarter. Maybe you can actually pull this off." "I can," I assured her. "But not alone." By the end of that meeting, I had my first real ally in the war against Marcus Kane. The second ex-girlfriend, Lisa Chen, was harder to track down. She'd moved to Portland and changed her name, but Elena helped me find her through social media. "I don't talk about Marcus," she said when I finally reached her by phone. "Ever. He's going to hurt me," I said simply. "Just like he hurt you." The silence stretched so long I thought she'd hung up. "What do you need?" she asked finally. "Photos of your injuries. Medical records if you have them. Anything that proves he's a pattern abuser." "I burned everything," she said. "I wanted to forget." "I understand. But other women are going to die if we don't stop him." Another long pause. "There might be." I kept a journal. During the worst of it. My therapist said it would help process the trauma. "Would you be willing to share entries from that journal? If it would put him away forever?" "Yes." 3 days later, Elena drove to Portland and returned with a shoebox full of evidence. Lisa's journal entries were heartbreaking and infuriating in equal measure, documenting years of escalating abuse in careful clinical detail. But more importantly, they established a clear pattern of behavior that would be devastating in court. Meanwhile, Detective Torres was making progress on her end. "Your brother's case is interesting," she told me during our second meeting. "Diego Martinez has been paying his legal bills through a series of shell companies, all traced back to your husband's business empire. Can you prove money laundering? We're building a case. But there's something else you should know. Diego wasn't just drunk when he hit Sarah Chen. Toxicology showed cocaine and methamphetamines in his system." "Drug trafficking?" I asked. "Possibly. We're investigating his connections to Marcus's restaurant business. A lot of high-end establishments are fronts for drug operations. The pieces were falling into place. Marcus wasn't just an abuser, he was running a criminal enterprise. Diego wasn't just a drunk driver. He was a drug dealer whose recklessness had killed an innocent woman. And my family had sold me to fund their criminal activities. There's one more thing, Detective Torres said. We've been watching your husband. He's been meeting regularly with known associates of the Moretti crime family. Organized crime? Money laundering, drug trafficking, possibly worse. Your marriage isn't just about control, Mrs. Kane. It's about legitimacy. You're his cover story, the respectable wife who makes him look like a pillar of the community. Everything made sense now. Marcus hadn't chosen me because he loved me. He'd chosen me because I was exactly the kind of woman who would make him appear harmless. A kindergarten teacher, sweet and trusting, the perfect camouflage for a monster. But monsters make mistakes when they underestimate their prey. And I was about to prove just how dangerous an underestimated woman could be. The trap I set for Marcus was beautiful in its simplicity. I'd been playing the perfect wife for 6 weeks, documenting his abuse and building my case while he grew increasingly confident in his control over me. But now it was time for the final act. I have wonderful news, I told him over dinner on a Friday evening, my voice bright with fabricated joy. What's that, sweetheart? He was scrolling through his phone, barely paying attention. The casual dismissal that once would have hurt me now served my purposes perfectly. I'm pregnant. His head snapped up, his expression cycling rapidly through surprise, calculation, and finally settling on possessive satisfaction. Are you sure? He asked. I took 3 tests. I lied smoothly. I wanted to be absolutely certain before I told you. Marcus stood and pulled me into his arms, spinning me around the kitchen like we were celebrating the greatest news in the world. This is perfect, he said, his hands already moving possessively to my flat stomach. Now you'll really be mine forever. If only he knew that forever was scheduled to end in approximately 72 hours. I want to tell my family, I said. Can we have them over for dinner tomorrow night? I want to share the news properly. Of course, Marcus agreed, magnanimous in his victory. We should celebrate. That night, as Marcus slept beside me with one arm thrown possessively across my waist, I sent carefully crafted text messages. To Roberto, emergency family meeting tomorrow night. Marcus's house, 7 p.m. It's about Diego's case. To Carmen, need to discuss urgent family business. Dinner at my house tomorrow. Come alone. To Elena, tomorrow night at 8 p.m. Everything we planned goes into motion. To Detective Torres, Saturday night. Have your team ready. The pieces were in position. Now I just had to execute the plan flawlessly. Saturday evening arrived gray and stormy, which seemed appropriate for what I had planned. I spent the day cooking an elaborate meal, Roberto's favorite carne asada, Carmen's preferred tres leches cake, all the foods that had once represented family love and were now just tools in my arsenal. Marcus was in an excellent mood, talking enthusiastically about baby names and nursery decorations while I smiled and nodded and hid recording devices throughout the house. I've been thinking, he said as I set the table with our best china. After the baby comes, we should move somewhere more private. Maybe a ranch in Montana or a compound in Idaho. Isolated. Cut off from any possible help or escape. The perfect place to raise a child who would never know their mother had once been free. That sounds wonderful, I agreed. Just us and our little family. Roberto and Carmen arrived exactly on time, both of them nervous and jumpy. They hugged me with fake enthusiasm, their anxiety palpable. Where's Diego? I asked innocently. Still dealing with legal issues, Roberto said quickly. He'll join us when everything's resolved. Carmen kept glancing around the house like she expected police to jump out of the closets. Which in about an hour they would. We sat down to dinner and I played the loving daughter and devoted wife to perfection. I asked about Roberto's business, complimented Carmen's new haircut, and gushed about how grateful I was for their support during my adjustment to married life. I have something important to tell you all, I said when dessert was served. What is it, Mija? Carmen asked, though her smile looked strained. I'm pregnant, I announced, watching their faces carefully. Roberto's expression was pure relief. A pregnant daughter would be even more trapped, even more compliant. Carmen actually started crying, though I suspected her tears were more about guilt than joy. "This calls for a toast," Marcus said, producing a bottle of expensive champagne. As he poured the drinks, I excused myself to freshen up, but really I was activating the recording devices and sending a final text to Detective Torres. 20 minutes. When I returned, they were deep in conversation about the future. Their plans for my life, my child's life, how perfectly everything was working out. "I'm so grateful to have such a loving family," I said, raising my glass. "People who would never lie to me or hurt me." Roberto shifted uncomfortably. Carmen couldn't meet my eyes. "To family," Marcus said, clinking his glass against mine. "To justice," I replied and drank. Then I set down my glass and looked at each of them in turn. "I know about Sarah Chin," I said quietly. The silence that followed was deafening. Roberto went white. Carmen dropped her fork with a clatter that seemed unnaturally loud. "I know about the embezzlement," I continued. "The forged documents. The money you stole from my accounts." "Sophia," Roberto started, but I held up my hand. "I know about Diego's drug dealing, about the plea bargain you bought with my inheritance. I know about Marcus's connections to organized crime, about the women he's hurt, about Maria Santos and her convenient car accident." Marcus's expression had gone cold, dangerous. This was the look that had preceded every beating, every threat, every moment of terror. "What do you think you know, sweetheart?" he asked, his voice dropping to that familiar whisper. "I know that you're all criminals," I said calmly. "And I know that your crimes are about to catch up with you." Marcus stood slowly, his hands clenching into fists. "You should be very careful, Sophia. You don't want to upset me. Not in your condition." "I'm not pregnant," I said, smiling at his shocked expression. "That was just bait to get you all here together." Roberto jumped to his feet. "Sophia, what have you done?" "What I should have done months ago," I replied. "I called the police." As if summoned by my words, the sound of sirens filled the evening air. Car doors slammed in the driveway, followed by heavy footsteps on the front porch. "Sofia Martinez Kane, this is Detective Torres. We have warrants for the arrest of Marcus Kane, Roberto Martinez and Carmen Martinez." Marcus lunged for me, his face twisted with rage, but I was ready. The months of documenting his abuse patterns had taught me to read his body language perfectly. I stepped aside as he stumbled forward, and Elena, who had been hiding in the kitchen, hit him across the back with a cast-iron skillet. He went down hard, blood streaming from his scalp. "That's for every woman you ever hurt," Elena said grimly. The front door burst open and Detective Torres led a team of officers into the dining room. Roberto tried to run but was tackled before he reached the back door. Carmen collapsed into a chair, sobbing hysterically. "Marcus Kane, you're under arrest for domestic violence, conspiracy, money laundering, and suspicion of murder," Detective Torres announced as officers cuffed his unconscious form. "Roberto Martinez, you're under arrest for embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy. Carmen Martinez, you're under arrest for fraud and conspiracy." As they read them their rights, I stood in my destroyed dining room, surrounded by overturned furniture and scattered evidence of the life I'd built on lies. "Are you all right?" Detective Torres asked me. "I'm perfect," I said, and for the first time in my adult life I meant it. But this was only the beginning. Diego was still out there, still free, still dangerous. And I had one more score to settle. Diego Martinez was hiding in a cheap motel on the outskirts of town, living off money Marcus had funneled to him through various criminal channels. Detective Torres and I found him 3 days after the arrests, holed up in room 237 with a prostitute and enough drugs to supply a small army. "Sophia?" he said when I walked through the door behind the police officers. "What the hell?" "Hello, little brother," I said calmly. Diego looked terrible. Prison would have been kinder to him than the life he'd been living since Sarah Chen's death. His face was gaunt, his eyes wild with paranoia and drug-induced psychosis. The golden boy who'd once been the family favorite was just another strung-out criminal now. "You called the cops on me?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Your own brother?" "You killed a pregnant woman," I replied. "And then you let our family sell me to pay for your defense." "I didn't know," he started. "You knew," I interrupted. "You knew exactly what Marcus was going to do to me and you didn't care." as long as your legal bills were paid. Diego was cuffed and arrested on charges of vehicular homicide, drug possession with intent to distribute, and conspiracy. But before they took him away, I had something else to give him. Her name was Sarah Chin, I said, showing him the photo I'd printed from the newspaper. She was 24 years old. She was having a baby girl and they were going to name her Hope. Diego stared at the photo and for a moment I saw something almost human flicker in his eyes. You destroyed that Hope, I continued. You killed that baby and you killed her mother, and then you were so much of a coward that you let me pay the price for your crimes. Sophia, I'm sorry, he began. No, you're not, I said. But you will be. As the police led him away, Diego looked back at me one last time. I saw fear in his eyes then, the recognition that his sister was no longer the gentle pushover he'd grown up with. I was someone new. Someone dangerous. Someone who kept her promises. The trials were a media sensation. Marcus Kane, the successful businessman who'd been living a double life as an abuser and criminal conspirator. The Martinez family who'd literally sold their daughter to fund their son's legal defense after he'd killed a pregnant woman while high on drugs. I testified in each trial, my voice steady and clear as I detailed the abuse, the financial fraud, the conspiracy that had destroyed so many lives. Marcus's defense attorney tried to paint me as a vindictive wife seeking revenge on her loving husband. But the evidence was overwhelming. The recordings, the medical documentation of abuse, the testimony from his ex-girlfriends. Jennifer Walsh took the stand and described the escalation of violence that had nearly cost her life. Lisa Chin testified via video link from her new home in Portland, reading excerpts from her journal that had the jury in tears. And when the prosecutor introduced evidence about Maria Santos, whose death was now being investigated as murder, Marcus's facade finally cracked. She was going to destroy me, he screamed from the witness stand. She was going to ruin everything I'd built. His confession to Maria's murder sealed his fate. Life in prison without possibility of parole. Roberto was convicted of embezzlement and fraud, sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. His construction company was dissolved, its assets seized to pay restitution to the victims of his crimes. Carmen received 10 years for her role in the conspiracy, though she spent most of her trial weeping and claiming she'd only been trying to save her family. I never meant for you to get hurt, Mija, she'd said when I visited her in jail before sentencing. But you did hurt me, I replied. You sold me to a monster, and you would have let him destroy me rather than face the consequences of your choices. She had no answer for that. Diego's trial was the most satisfying. His lawyer tried to argue that he was just a young man who'd made a mistake, that he deserved a second chance. But Sarah Chen's family was there, her parents holding photos of their daughter and their granddaughter who would never be born. Their victim impact statements were devastating, and Diego's fake tears and rehearsed apology rang hollow in comparison. 30 years to life for vehicular homicide while under the influence. No possibility of parole for 25 years. As the judge read the sentence, I thought about Sarah Chin and her baby Hope, and I felt something like peace settle in my chest. It wasn't enough. Nothing would ever be enough to balance the scales for what my brother had taken from the world. But it was justice. Father William performed the annulment ceremony on a crisp October morning, exactly 1 year after my wedding day. Are you sure about this? He asked as we stood before the altar where I'd once promised to love and honor a monster. I was never really married, I replied. The whole thing was a transaction, not a sacrament. The annulment was granted based on fraud. Marcus had concealed his criminal activities and history of violence, making the marriage contract invalid from the beginning. Elena stood beside me as Father William pronounced the marriage null and void. I was no longer Mrs. Marcus Kane. I was Sophia Martinez again, free to become whoever I chose to be. Afterward, Elena and I drove to the cemetery where Sarah Chin was buried. I placed white roses on her grave, not the wilted roses from my wedding bouquet, but fresh ones that smelled like hope and new beginnings. I'm sorry, I whispered to the headstone. I'm sorry my family's crimes cost you your life. But they're paying for it now. All of them. There was a smaller marker next to Sarah's grave. Baby Hope Chin taken too soon. I left flowers there too, tears streaming down my face as I thought about the child who would never laugh or play or grow up. We did it, Elena said softly, her hand on my shoulder. They're all behind bars. It doesn't bring her back, I replied. No. But it might save the next woman. Or the next child. He was right. Marcus would never hurt another partner. Diego would never drive drunk again. Roberto would never embezzle money to fund criminal activities. The cycle of abuse and criminality that had defined my family was finally broken. 2 years later, I was teaching second grade at a school in Colorado, 1,000 miles away from the life I'd left behind. I'd used the money I'd recovered, my inheritance plus damages from the civil lawsuits, to start a foundation for victims of domestic abuse and families affected by drunk driving. The Sarah Chin Foundation provided legal assistance, counseling, and emergency shelter for women trying to escape violent relationships. My students called me Ms. Martinez, and I was happy to be myself again. No longer Mrs. Anyone, no longer property to be traded or controlled. I'd learned to trust my instincts, to recognize the warning signs of manipulation and abuse. The gentle kindergarten teacher who'd believed everyone deserved a second chance was gone, replaced by someone harder but wiser. I still got letters from Marcus in prison. Long rambling screeds about how I'd ruined his life, how I'd pay for my betrayal, how he'd find me when he got out. I threw them away unread and had them forwarded to Detective Torres, who used them as evidence of continuing threats and harassment. Marcus would never get out. His appeals had all been denied, and his connections couldn't help him from behind bars. Roberto died of a heart attack in prison during his 3rd year of incarceration. Carmen served her full sentence and was released last month, but she'd never tried to contact me. Diego was still appealing his conviction, still claiming he was the victim of a conspiracy. He'd be eligible for parole when he was 52 years old. I hoped he never got it. Sometimes, walking home from school on autumn evenings, I thought about the woman I'd been on my wedding day. So naive, so trusting, so desperate to believe in fairy tales. That woman had died the moment she heard her father sell her to a monster. In her place rose someone who understood that sometimes the only way to survive is to become the predator instead of the prey. I wasn't bitter about the transformation. I was grateful for it. The gentle teacher who'd seen the best in everyone would have spent her life being victimized by people like Marcus, Roberto, Carmen, and Diego. She would have raised children who learned to accept abuse as love, to normalize manipulation and control. The woman I'd become would never be anyone's victim again. And sometimes, late at night when I was alone in my small apartment, I'd raise a glass of wine to my reflection in the window and toast the truth that had set me free. Family isn't about blood. It's about love, protection, and loyalty. My biological family had sold me for money. But Elena, Detective Torres, Father William, Jennifer, Lisa, and all the other people who'd helped me escape, they were my real family now. And we'd built something stronger than blood ties. We'd built justice. On my kitchen counter, next to the school photos of my current students, I kept a framed picture of Sarah Chin and baby Hope. A reminder of why the fight had been worth it, why breaking free had been necessary not just for me but for all the future victims I'd helped save. Some fairy tales end with the princess marrying the prince. Mine ended with the princess slaying the dragon and everyone who'd fed her to it. And we all lived happily ever after.